Today I have a story that I want to tell you about a little girl who got expelled from school. I believe she was 12 or 13 years old. I have this saying that I often use, and that saying is, the police are not the problem. I've posted this on my social media pages from time to time, and when I do, I'm usually people go nuts when I make that statement. They will say, "What, you think there's nothing wrong with the police?" and blah blah blah. Well, those people are unable to see past their own nose to understand the concepts that I'm trying to relay. But the fact of the matter is, the police are not the problem with our society. When it comes to like the top 20 biggest problems with our society, I don't think the police are even in the top 20. But for some reason, we get blamed for a lot of problems and failings in our society. And I've said this before too, that this is often because the police are just the last ones to attempt to fix the problem. And there's been all these other failings up until that point. And then when the police are the last ditch effort to come in and solve this problem, everyone blames it on the police. This is what I've seen at least many times myself. The fact of the matter is that the police often have to stand by and watch. I say that we stand by and watch society collapse. We know what's about to go down. We know what the end result of these people's actions are going to be. And unfortunately, we're stuck just standing by watching them occur. So the story about this little girl that got expelled from school, this took place shortly after I went on to first shift. This might have been my first or second week working days. And I got dispatched to a school. I don't know if it was an elementary school or a intermediate type school. I can't remember. Maybe the girl was like 10. She might have been in 5th grade. But regardless, I was not used to going to these schools and having these kind of runs. So the run that I was dispatched on said that a student was found with a knife at school and they wanted a police officer to come by. So I go to the school and I'm talking to, I believe it was the principal. And she just keeps saying, "Well, we found a knife in this girl's bag." I was like, "Okay, like, tell me what happened." And I, just like I do with everybody else, I say, "Well, how did this happen? Let's go back a little bit." And she says, "Well, they were out on the playground and she showed it to another student. So that student came and told us that this girl had a knife and now she's in the office." And we talked for a little, and I was like, "Well, did she threaten anybody with the knife? Did she pose any danger to anybody with this knife?" And the teacher said, "No, but she had a knife." And I was just standing there waiting, like, okay, like, what next? Another kind of part of this situation is that my job as a police officer, especially when I go into other organizations, isn't necessarily to go in and make the rules and tell people what to do. My job, really, the majority of the time, is just to keep the peace and let people make their own rules and enforce their own rules. And that's the way it is in a school building. So this teacher just kept looking at me like I was supposed to be appalled by what happened. And then she told me, well, no, before she told me that she was going to expel this girl, I said, "Well, can I go in and talk to her?" So I go and I talk to this little girl. She's sitting in the office and she's sitting there crying. She was, I don't want to say what her ethnicity was, but her family does not come from the United States. They were recent immigrants. She was probably born in the United States, but her parents weren't. But I don't know. It's relatively significant. So I'm talking to her and I ask her, "Did you bring a knife to school?" And she said yes. And then I asked her, "Why would you do something like that?" And she doesn't really have it. She just kept saying, "I don't know. I don't know why I brought a knife to school." And then finally she just said, "I just wanted to be cool. I thought it was neat. I wanted to show my friends." And I looked at the principal. I was like, "Okay, like, now what do you want to do?" And the teacher said, "That's dangerous and you can't have knives and the rules." She starts just unloading on this little girl. And that's when the little girl she yelled out what kind of knife it was. And this is the kind of knife. This is a pumpkin carving knife. A knife that's intentionally dull. It's a safety knife. So this little girl brought a pumpkin carving knife into school in the fall. It was pumpkin carving season. And she thought it was neat. She wanted to show her friends. But then the principal looked at me and said, well, so I told her, I was like, well, what are you going to do? She goes, well, we have to expel her. We have a zero tolerance policy. And this was a private school. And she looked at me, she goes, I'm sure all the public schools have the same rule. And I kind of looked at her, I was like, I don't know. So I talked to this girl a little bit more, and then I pulled the principal aside. And I was talking to her, I said, hey, you know, there's a lot going on with this little girl besides this knife. Like, she's got some stuff in her head that she needs help with. She's got some, and I asked, like, is she on an IEP? Does she have any learning disabilities or anything? And I said, she needs some counseling or something. She didn't appear to have any violent tendencies, but she was just upset, and you could tell she was awkward and having a hard time fitting in at school. And the principal said, yeah, I know. We've had incidents with her in the past. And I said, well, what are you doing to prevent those from happening again? And that's when she said, well, we're going to expel her because we have a zero tolerance policy. And, you know, it's not really my place to get in the middle of that. I think the principal could tell that I wasn't really too keen on that idea, but it's their school. They can do what they want. So I asked, okay, that's fine. Like, what do you need from me? And she asked me to take a report. So I took a very basic report documenting that a child brought a safety knife in a school. And it was one of the bigger ones. It wasn't a small one like this. This is the only one that I could find at my house. But this child brought a safety knife into school. Didn't threaten anybody with it. Didn't do anything that would pose a threat to anybody. Simply had it on her person. And that the teacher was expelling her. So in the process of taking my report, I got the student's name, I got their address, and I got the parents' information, because the mother arrived at school when I was still there, and I was able to talk to her briefly. Now, the reason I remember this story so well is because the next day I was working, and I was sitting in my cruiser, and I saw a car get dispatched to an address for a missing persons report. The address looked really familiar to me. I couldn't remember why. So I clicked on the run, I looked at it, and it had this child's name. And the run said the child was kicked out of school the day before, and now she's gone missing. And my heart sank, to be honest. This girl, they said she got good grades. She was a good student. She didn't really have a lot of problems other than maybe one outburst that happened before, and then this day where she brought a pumpkin carving knife into school. So I called the officer who was taking that report, and I gave them the story about what happened, because with the parents, English not being their first language, I didn't know if they were going to be able to articulate what had happened the day before school. So I called and I talked to the other officer, and they completed their report. The next day when I came into work, I looked up that report because I was curious if that girl had been found, and I was worried that something wrong had happened to her. When I looked at the report, when you take a missing persons report, there's two reports. There's one when the person goes missing, and then there's another one when the person is found, and we call that a recovery. So I clicked on the recovery, and in the recovered missing persons report, it said that the student was found sitting on a bench outside of the school that they had just been kicked out of. I just feel so bad for this little girl and what she's going through, because she's obviously very young and she doesn't understand the repercussions of her actions, but she's being held to an impossible standard. And the reason she's being held to an impossible standard is because these schools have rules that don't make sense. And it's not just the schools. These rules are being applied across our society in ways that they're meant to be fair. They're thinking, oh, we have a zero tolerance policy, everybody gets treated the same, and that's the expectation. But they don't necessarily need to be applied. This is the whole argument, do you follow the spirit of the law or do you follow the letter of the law? And I think that too many organizations in our society are following everything to the letter of the law and not to the spirit of the law. And it's creating problems. And I have to sit back and watch things happen to children like this. And I can't help but believe that sometime in the future, that girl might become my problem as a police officer. And the reason for that is the things that happened to her when she was a child. The time that she needed support the most, she was told by the people that she needed the most that she wasn't wanted. And that's a very unfortunate thing. So those are going to be my thoughts for today. I'll talk to you soon.